Presiding Officer, yesterday I had the honour of speaking in a debate brought forward by my good friend Alexander Stewart, MSP, to commemorate 100 years of the poppy. It was a moving debate, and today's debate has also had some very notable contributions. If I might just mention the contribution of my colleague Edward Mountain, who spoke about the fragility and price of peace and talked about the unconditional offer that members of our armed forces make in their service. And he also spoke about the role of families. I thought Paul Sweeney was right to bring up the issues he brought up in relation to the current service conditions of our armed forces and also the implications of future configuration. Alex Cole-Hamilton spoke movingly about his great uncle. I also have great uncles buried in the fields of France and Flanders, and the remarkable story of Wilfred Owen, who pretty much chose to go back to the front in those dying days, as it turned out, of the war, and tragically it led to his death. Jackie Dunbar gave an excellent speech about her pride and her family pride in the Gordon Highlanders, and I was particularly struck by this concept of they had each other's backs. That absolutely describes the spirit and tradition of Scotland's regiments and the regiments of the British Army. Alexander Burnett spoke movingly about his grandfather, and he also praised the work of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. I've seen that work, as many of you will have seen, and it is hugely moving as well to see how well manicured those graveyards are. Gordon MacDonald reminded us of the important role that our services play in the lives of our community. And Christine Graham spoke about the duty of politicians in respect to sending our armed forces in harm's way, and also conjured up the image of an overexcited Liam Kerr on a Harley Davidson, which I must see that picture, by the way, Christine Graham. Liz Smith spoke with... Yes, indeed.
Christine Graham.
It'll cost you a donation to Poppy Scotland to see that picture.
I will happily make that donation to Poppy Scotland for the privilege of seeing that picture. Liz Smith spoke with her usual authority about matters relating to education. She also spoke about how the spirit of remembrance continues to grow, and I think we will see that again this weekend. And Paul O'Kane spoke, I think, quite rightly about the work of the Nielsen War Memorial Association, of which he is a part, and the excellent work they do in the community all the year round. And David Torrance reminded us of the power of a cuppa and a catch-up. Absolutely. One of the blights of our modern society is loneliness. And I also agree with him in relation to his comments about the census question. And many members, Deputy Presiding Officer, have rightly reflected upon the important work done by Poppy Scotland in offering support to veterans and active service personnel and their families. And the work of the Royal British Legion, SAFA, Combat Stress and the Anchor Som Association, so many other service charities, is so immensely important, and we are grateful for what they do. Today, Armistice Day, is really a most appropriate time to take time to thank our servicemen and women for everything they do, and to thank our veterans for the contribution they continue to make in so many walks of life. It's been my good fortune, for as long as I can remember, to have the privilege of working alongside veterans. They are men and women of exceptional character and capacity, and I pay tribute to them. They truly are an asset in every situation you come across them. And I have learned and continue to learn much from the veterans I work alongside. And for example, I'm very grateful to my colleague Edward Mountain, the Scottish Conservative Deputy Chief Whip. I value his leadership and I value his guidance. Edward is someone whose life is fashioned by the values of service, duty and patriotism. And I also want to reflect on those who paid the ultimate price to preserve our freedoms and our way of life. We owe it to them to never forget what they did for us and to devote ourselves to continuing to work for a better, more civilised, freer world for every human being. And I especially want to thank Her Majesty's Armed Forces for all their work in the past year, from helping the most vulnerable Afghans and other nationals escape the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, and we heard about the emotional consequences of that for many others, to helping the Scottish Government set up NHS Louisa Jordan at the height of the pandemic, the successful rollout of the vaccine programme throughout Scotland, supported by our armed forces personnel, boosting the protection of the most vulnerable against COVID-19. And as we speak, members of the armed forces are working in our NHS, easing the crisis pressures our National Health Service is facing. It is in recognition of their service that governments across the UK have a duty and obligation to veterans and their families. This week, the Scottish Veterans Commissioner, Charlie Wallace, published his report on the Scottish Government's progress against the Commissioner's recommendations to improve veteran services and support in Scotland. And whilst welcoming progress, as we do on these benches, the Commissioner also stated that there remain stubborn challenges. Last year, the Scottish Veterans Commission identified 20 recommendations in need of more attention from the Scottish Government to drive change and highlighted his concerns around employment and skills development and health and mental health services. These were the areas where, among others, the Commissioner felt the ongoing pandemic posed an increased risk to service leavers and veterans, who often also face additional challenges when seeking civilian employment or health or mental health care services. The Commissioner stated, and I quote, "We have seen more people suffering from increased anxiety, isolation and job losses, and services which are slower to respond to need." These are still areas where a strong focus and emphasis on support and early intervention needs to be maintained. The Veterans Commissioner also stated he wanted to see further progress in other areas he had previously flagged, including the lack of recognition of service leavers and veterans' qualifications, skills and experience, which prevents them competing for employment opportunities, efforts to better align veterans' skills and abilities with known skills gaps in key sectors of the Scottish economy and where there are labour shortages, and ensuring early service leavers get the right levels of support because they can often be vulnerable to poor transition back into civilian life. The UK Government have introduced an Armed Forces champion in every Job Centre Plus district, who ensures that they provide the support that best meets the needs of the armed forces community. Scotland's social security system presents opportunities to make a positive and meaningful difference for the armed forces community in Scotland. And one of the ways this can be achieved is through the Scottish Government establishing a nationwide Armed Forces and Veterans Champion network within Social Security Scotland. Such a network would allow the agency to better understand the specific needs of the armed forces community in Scotland and to build relationships with a view to sharing information and encouraging the community to get more involved in the agency's experience panels and other forums. And this brings me to the wider issue of the Scottish Government's use of working groups to oversee policy planning, development and delivery. The membership of these working groups often includes people with experience of the policy being examined. However, despite their unique needs, members of Scotland's Armed Forces community are noticeably absent from the membership of these policy working groups. Therefore, in the light of the unique and often multiple and complex needs of the armed forces community in Scotland, who additionally represent a significant group within society, it is imperative that the Scottish Government consult with and involve that community in future policy development. And we believe there should be a cross-government commitment to involve our armed forces community in any working groups established to develop and take forward policy, ensuring their specific needs are recognised and their experiences are learned from. Whilst we in the Scottish Conservatives recognise that progress has been made, we also recognise that much more needs to be done to support our service personnel and our veterans. We need to ensure financial security and prosperity, provide opportunities for further education and employment, and look after physical and mental health. That is why, as Edward Mountain said in the opening contribution to this debate from these benches, the Scottish Conservatives are proposing to introduce an Armed Forces and Veterans Bill in this session. Today, at 11 a.m, we felt silent to remember the sacrifices made to protect the freedoms we enjoy today. On Sunday, we will do the same. Let us come together and show our collective respect to those who paid the ultimate price. We will remember.